coming to our Zoom session. Thank you coming to our seminar series that we are organizing as TOBB University of Economics and Technology, Department of Political Science and International Relations. Today we have an interesting speech about Japan's relations with Middle East. And our guest is Professor Satoru NAKAMURA from Kobe University. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Professor Nakamura actually has visited our university, Tobe University, in 2019. He made a speech here. He knows our university. And let me introduce him a little bit. He is actually one of the very few Japanese experts on Middle East, and he actually spent some time in Middle East, and he speaks Arabic. After graduating from the Tokyo University School of Languages and Arabic Studies, he was a special assistant at the Embassy of Japan in Riyadh. And he became a research fellow in Tokyo University, the Institute of Advanced Studies, quite prestigious. And he's been a guest researcher at the Upper Parliament in Japan. And he spent time in Middle East. He was a visiting researcher in Qatar University, and then he was a visiting researcher in King Saud University in Saudi Arabia. And then he was a visiting researcher at the Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva. Yes, currently he's in the Kobe University at the Faculty of Intercultural Study, which we are trying to conclude the exchange agreement if we can. It's taken quite a lot of work. Today, yes, he's going to talk about, his topic is Japan's international cooperation in the Middle East. International cooperation is the phrase preferred by Japan to mean development aid or humanitarian aid or things related with it. So before, talking any further, I would like to leave the floor or leave the screens to Professor Nakamura. It's very nice to see you again, Professor. Please, you can start your talk.
Thank you very much, Sensei Hoja. Marhaba and konnichiwa from Kobe, Japan. How do you do, all participants today? It is very nice to communicate with Zoom. I hope Corona pandemic is giving you minimum causalities. Everybody is suffering in the world, but it is very nice to communicate with you across ODA today like this. Thank you very much for this beautiful opportunity, Sensei, and all participants. Let me start sharing the screen. Is this ready? Can you watch it? Yes, yes. Today I would talk about Japan's new international cooperation. Japan's official development aid, or ODA, has revised its directions almost every decade, but maintained its merits. ODA opens opportunity for developing countries for peace and prosperity, and donor countries follow international principles and standards set by OECD Development Assistance Committee, DAC, hoping welfare and a better life for the people in developing countries. This slide highlights two major shifts in Japan's ODA. The first is that Japan is trying to engage in peace building in post-conflict countries, not only in traditional ODA. And second is that Japan does not work to provide ODA by Japan alone, but rather work together with some developing countries to provide ODA to other developing countries. Japan concludes partnership with 12 Middle Eastern countries, and Turkey is one of 5 active partners for Japan to provide Japan's ODA to developing countries in the Middle East. How about, can you listen to me clearly so far? Sensei.
Yes, Sensei. Yes, please.
Okay, yes, I will keep going, yes?
Thank you.
Thank you. I will confirm quickly here that what is foreign aid. ODA is mainly development cooperation, and most of the donors are OECD members, and most of them are Western countries. Exceptions are Turkey, Japan, and Korea currently. Foreign aid is the term including ODA, as well as military aid and plus humanitarian aid. In recent years, one can observe emerging donor countries like China. They are not OECD member, and they do not follow the DAC standard. Some countries are not member states of DAC and stay as DAC participant states. They are Arabian Gulf countries such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. I would skip this slide. One can check classification of aid recipient group if necessary later. Japan's official development aid, or ODA, has refreshed its policy almost every decade. Japan's ODA began attracting attention in its high economic growth period in 1970s, especially after the first oil crisis, because Japan announced ODA budget doubling target in 1977. Japan was the world top donor during 1991 to 2000. Japan's development cooperation method has been revised and articulated after 1990s. Japan announced its ODA policy through enacting ODA Charter in 1992. A new ODA Charter was enacted in 2003 and the Development Cooperation Charter in 2015. What changed and what didn't change in Japan's ODA? What is new directions? Japan's ODA had received criticism from other donors, frankly, but Japan has challenged to refresh methods and also tried to explain its reality. My lecture today sets up three main hypotheses and divides them into small hypotheses. Then you will try to examine my presentation, my talk. I understand some participants today are undergraduate students, and you can regard them as quiz today for you. At the end of this lecture, you may have your own answers or ask me questions or to think these hypotheses or quiz. Yes? First, hypothesis first is related to Japan's strategy as economic development. Hypothesis H121 is about Japan's ODA distribution approach. Is it poverty reduction approach or economic growth approach? Hypothesis H12, does Japan allocate ODA budget sufficiently to low-income countries or LICs? Hypothesis 2, second, is related to question that Japan aims at mercantilist national interests or common interests with aid recipients. Hypothesis H21 is if Japan's ODA is disbursed to former colonies and resource-rich countries. Hypothesis H22 is if Japan's ODA is tight or not tight. Hypothesis H23 is if Japan disburses ODA to Japan's trade partners. Hypothesis 3 is if Japan plays any security roles in the Middle East. Development Cooperation Charter 2015 sets principles of Japan's ODA. The first principle is A, contributing to peace and prosperity through cooperation for non-military purposes. This means Japan does not provide military aid, but Japan is trying to contribute for peace and security in conflict zone. In short, Japan's challenge is contribution to peace without military. Does this sound a joke or not? You will say it's let us slide. The second principle is B, promoting human security. It means that Japanese government is trying a people-centered approach to provide ODA. The third principle is C, cooperation aimed at self-reliant development of aid recipients through assistance for self-help efforts of developing countries, as well as dialogue and collaboration based on Japan's experience and expertise. It means that Japanese government aims at equal relation with aid recipients and takes economic growth approach in providing ODA instead of charity approach. This point will be discussed as a debate between poverty reduction approach and economic growth approach after next slide. Am I too fast or is this speed adequate for you, Sensei?
Yes, yes, Sensei.
Okay, I could keep going, yeah, because I cannot see the students, and so I try to
speaking alone.
step by step. Thank you. Yes. Japan's ODA has faced controversy over approach for ODA with other donors at OECD since early stage of Japan's donor activity. DAC countries had preferred poverty reduction approach, which aims at satisfying basic human needs (BHN) in developing countries. Poverty reduction approach satisfying BHN means ODA provides food, health, and primary education as priority. This approach sounds good, but it is something like charity activities, and donors only distribute aid to developing countries. This will maintain disparity between the donors and the aid recipient because aid recipient will not improve their economic infrastructure and capability. Most developing countries, as I understand, they do not want to fish for free, but rather they want to learn how to catch fish. In contrast, Japan's ODA has aimed to share how to catch fish with developing countries. It is economic growth approach. Japan challenged to support achieve self-reliance of aid recipients through infrastructure building, export promotion, and industrialization. This debate between poverty reduction approach and economic growth approach has been hot on the table at OECD, and Japan has been pressured to accept poverty reduction approach. Therefore, Japan has challenged to refresh ODA policies, but also Japan has maintained economic growth approach. This slide shows you that Japan's foreign aid type menu as well as the origin of Japan's ODA. Economic cooperation or ODA is classified into grant-in aid and soft loan assistance at OECD guideline. Grant-in aid includes technical cooperation. Soft loan assistance is a loan which interest rates are lower than in financial market, and its interest rate is concessional. Disaster relief is the area that Japan has elaborated its skills. Also, Japan's ODA included overseas cooperation volunteers, cultural aid, humanitarian aid, and peace activities. I will come back to peace activities at the later slides. Japan's ODA began as post-war compensation in 1950s. Japan's first foreign aid after the Second World War was technical cooperation. It was partly because Japan did not have sufficient finance to lend loan to other countries yet, but from the beginning, Japan took economic growth approach. There is a reason why Japan prefers economic growth approach in ODA. It is because Japan maintains double identities of aid recipient and donor up to today. Japan began high economic growth after 1960s and appreciated for development assistance provided by the US and the World Bank after the Second World War to Japan. Japan was totally distracted at the war, and Japan was devastated and very poor at the time. Those aid to Japan built infrastructures for economic growth. Thus, Japan appreciates for it and keeps identity as an aid recipient. Japan took long years to pay off all the debt, but it was good for Japan. Debt gave incentive to Japanese to work hard to repay it. This is one of some reasons why Japan prefers economic growth approach in ODA and sets priority to promote self-reliance of aid recipients. Turkey and Japan share virtues in ODA. Both began to be donors at OECD before they became OECD graduates. Turkey and Japan share some sort of sense of responsibility to lower developing countries. Japan had a hard time to be accepted by international community after the Second World War. Japan had to join in the Colombo Plan and provide aid to former British colonies. Turkey was among the first OECD members since 1960. Japan joined in OECD in 1964. It is good to talk anything. It's not good to talk anything as Asian or Western. I do not support racial debate. However, it is true that Turkey and Japan are two Asian countries which began engaging in ODA at early stage if one can regard Turkey as Asia. What do you think? Now Korea is the third Asian country to join in OECD. And finally, the Western experts start understanding Japan's economic growth approach in recent years. It should be pointed out that today, Japanese regard Turkey is a very good partner for Japan to assist other developing countries. Turkey's TICA and Japan's JICA cooperate together to provide ODA to countries around Turkey. The most successful model of Japan's ODA was that to the Southeast Asia. Japan provided ODA and investment, which built infrastructure and provided technical cooperation, and the Southeast Asian countries began export to Japan. The combination of the three, ODA, investment, and export promotion led economic growth of Southeast Asian countries. Japan's ODA disbursement achieved the world's largest budget scale during 1991 to 2000. Japan ranks world fourth in recent years, but Japan's ratio of ODA to GNI has been lower among donor countries. It was 0.23 in 2017, for example. Larger budget scale countries for ODA, such as the US and Japan, tend to be lower at ratio of ODA to GNI, which is not good, frankly. Here, we check tied and untied ODA. Tied ODA is the ODA project and contract that is given to donors' national private companies as contracts of construction, procurement, consultancy, etc. This is called tied. Untied is the opposite. Untied ODA contract is that one donor country opens its ODA budget to public bidding and invites private companies of other countries for contract to take the order of ODA projects in construction, procurement, consultancy, etc. OECD monitor all donors' tied or untied ratio in their total ODA budget. OECD regards high untied ratio is good because, which means that the donor do not allocate ODA budget for the purpose to monopolize the ODA budget of its own, and ODA budget is spent efficiently for aid recipients. Japan announced in 1977 the goal to achieve 0% tied ratio in allocating ODA budget, and in 1996, Japan achieved it. Then the untied ratio has been kept around 85 to 96% during 2000 to 2015. With this data, Japan's untied ratio is often regarded not very high. However, in reality, Japan's untied aid contract ratio is higher than other donors, as I estimate, though Japanese government does not criticize other donors. For example, in 2017, Japan's untied ratio was 93%, which means around 6% of project was tied to Japanese private sector. Then, around 70% out of the 93% was awarded to Japanese private sector, which was around 63% being additional to Japanese contract. In total, in 2017, 6% plus 63% equals 69% of ODA total procurement was awarded to Japanese private sector. Is it high ratio or lower ratio? It's very hard. Anyway, this examination is not the virtuous debate, I guess. You check this chart, and one may consider that Japan's distribution of bilateral ODA is not directed to low-income countries. One of the total ODA disbursement, can you check it? The letters are very small. Look there.
It can be seen, I think. It's
okay.
good.
Yeah, okay. Out of the total ODA disbursement, distribution to LDCs shares 25.6%, while the share to LMICs or the low middle income country is 45.5%. Japan insists on trap of middle income country. Even in the countries of LMICs, one will find low-income citizens, and they need foreign aid yet. Donors should not ignore LMICs, and it is good target for ODA since it is ready for economic growth. This is Japan's claims. You can consider with example of the Middle Eastern countries in this slide. This is my original calculation. This indicates Japan's total ODA disbursement to the Middle Eastern countries up to 2016. You find similar tendency with the previous chart at previous slide. LMIC countries receive larger amount of ODA disbursement in total by country. You can check which countries are classified to different income level in 2016. C. Do you think it's good distribution of ODA if LDC countries such as Afghanistan and Yemen receive more ODA amount than LMICs such as Pakistan, Egypt, India, etc. Mathematical formula of aid absorption capacity for each developing countries of aid or aid recipient, it's not formulated yet in the world in aid studies. Japan's disbursement to aid recipients seems sound in my view. What do you think? LDCs have only smaller aid absorption capacity, and Japan's disbursement is, I guess, sound. What do you think? You can check geographical distribution of ODA by major donors. They distribute foreign aid to former colonies or direct military purpose. During the Cold War era, UK distributed ODA to Commonwealth countries, and France concentrates ODA to Africa. UK started disbursing more ODA to Africa or the regions of LDCs. The US distributed 40% of foreign aid to Israel and Egypt after 1980s, and after the September 11th incident, US invasion to Afghanistan and Iraq, US switched the top aid recipients to Iraq and Afghanistan. OECD donors are composed of around 30 countries, and especially Nordic countries. Scandinavian countries prefer poverty reduction approach, which has been said its origin was tradition of Christian mission. However, some donors, UK, France, and USA, distribute foreign aid to former colonies and military targets, though they are only a part of OECD members. Maybe this was the one I should have shown to you. Sorry, sorry. I could not, I didn't push exactly. Or am I right? This is nice. Was I right?
Yes, yes, Sensei.
No problem. Yes. I go to 20, yes. Japan's ODA disbursement was often said to concentrate in Asia. It is true that nearly half of cumulative amount of bilateral ODA has concentrated in East Asia. However, one may point out that Japan's ODA is well globalized in its distribution pattern to regions in the world. Japan has distributed its ODA to South Asia, Central and South America, Middle East, and Africa. The Middle East has not been poor as Africa, but its share is around 12% in total so far. Top recipients of cumulative ODA among MENAP or Middle East and North Africa and Pakistan from Japan are first Pakistan, then Egypt, third Iraq, fourth Turkey, and fifth Afghanistan, and followed by Jordan, Tunisia, Morocco, Syria, Yemen, and Iran. One will have questioned why the MENAP countries receive ODA with this pattern from Japan. I find that Japan's ODA disbursement to MENAP has 5 distribution patterns. They are classified based on the ODA type menu. Countries can be classified which aid menu a country receives with largest amount. The first is A group, countries which receive grants in aid as largest ODA pattern. They are Afghanistan, Yemen, and Palestine. They are in this group. Group B is a soft yen loan group. Algeria, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Pakistan, Lebanon. They receive soft yen loan as the largest aid menu. Group C is ODA Triangle Cooperation Group. This group is special, very special, since they receive soft yen loans as the maximum aid menu, but also they work with Japan for Triangle ODA. They are Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, Tunisia, and Turkey. Triangle cooperation means that they cooperate Japan to disburse Japan's ODA to other developing countries. Group D is those which received almost no ODA from Japan, and they are Israel and Libya. Group E is Technical Transfer Group. They are classified to ODA graduates, but had received only technical cooperation. They are all Arabian Gulf countries, including Saudi Arabia and UAE. This lecture already introduced Turkey and Japan cooperate in triangle cooperation. It is a kind of South-South aid cooperation through Japan, even though Japan is not exactly South. This is again showing Japan and other partners working together to provide aid to third countries. Here, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, and Tunisia cooperate with Japan to provide ODA to neighboring countries in the Middle East, Africa, and Central Asia. Japan highly evaluates these partners and calls them strategic partners. Turkey and Japan cooperate especially in field of disaster relief activities. They cooperate in multi-level across governments, NPOs, and local governments. The citizens' cooperation at the Turkish earthquake in 1999 was widespread. I noticed with some interesting common thinking among Japanese NPO workers. They say that the aid providers learn from aid recipients. They want to promote self-reliance for aid recipients even through disaster relief activities. I observe that Japanese aid workers want to be equal with aid recipients. This is a slide for Turkey-Japan cooperation for triangle aid after 1997. Turkey's KICA and Japan's JICA established 20 programs and 76 courses by 2018 and provided aid to 1,083 aid recipients in 34 countries. This cooperation is fantastic, don't you think so?
Yes, Sensei.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Regarding the hypothesis that Japan's ODA is for the purpose of mercantilist national interests or common interests with aid recipients, the largest trade patterns for Japan in the Middle East are largest trade partners, partners for Japan in the Middle East is Arabian Gulf countries, and Japan could disburse only a technological transfer cooperation to them. It means that ODA is naturally limited to really limited to make use for energy security, Japan's energy security. Among top 5 ODA recipients, 4 of them are second largest trade partner group for Japan, composed of Pakistan, Egypt, Iraq, and Turkey. Afghanistan is LGC with no trade power. Thus, it can be pointed out that trade matters, but it is not sole factor nor a primary factor for Japan's ODA. Aid distribution is tailored for each recipient, and many factors affect it. Still, Japan's ODA disbursement pattern maintains economic growth approach. Iraq and Iran are potential economic power with huge oil and gas reservation, but they have been involved in armed conflicts and were imposed economic sanctions for decades, which impeded economic cooperation with Japan. Japan announced fresh policy for economic growth approach in ODA with equality infrastructure, inviting more private funds and cooperation of NPO, and began increasing ODA budget. It was worried that Japan set up new goals for Japan's own economy around 2015, such as infrastructure export goal of 30 trillion yen per year, and it may seem Japan now seeks its national interests, but I estimate it is a slight shift within maintenance of common interests with aid recipients. Japan's ODA maintains comparatively high untied ratio, as previous slide indicated. What do you think? From this slide, I would talk over new directions of Japan's ODA. It's ODA for peace building. Japan's ODA for peace building began at Palestinian aid in 1992. In 2003, new ODA charter was institutionalized a peace-building activity as part of ODA in Japan. Then, Japan has engaged in active roles in post-conflict countries such as Cambodia, East Timor, Sri Lanka, Mindanao in Philippines, Iraq, and Afghanistan. One can point out that this is a minor shift in Japan's security policy. This is not minor, I mean the major shift in Japan's security policy. Japan used to take the so-called comprehensive security policy after 1977, which set a goal to secure Japan's economic security, including energy security and food security, through any policy tools, including ODA, except military measures. However, today, Japan sets a policy to take roles in global security through non-military methods. I will give examples of Japan's peace building in Palestine and Afghanistan. This is the example of Japan's peace building in Palestine. Japan began policy to build agro-industrial park development in the Jordan River Rift Valley, Jericho, in 2006. 40 Palestinian private companies concluded contracts for renting tenant units, and 8 of them began operations by 2017. They plan to export their products to the Gulf through Jordan. 4 countries, Japan, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine supposed to cooperate for this project. Moreover, Japan invited Malaysian experts to share their experience at entrepreneurial policy for middle and small-scale enterprises. Japan's approach has no political ambitions in Israel nor Palestine. This slide explains the regional and international multilateralism to support the aforementioned agro-industrial park in Palestine. Many triangle cooperation is created. The first triangle is Japan-Malaysian cooperation to support Palestinian industrialization, as mentioned at previous slide. The second triangle is, though I didn't draw lines in this slide, Japan-Jordan cooperation to support Palestine products to export to the Gulf. In reality, Israeli security sector had negative impact for the progress of the project. Japan and some Israeli experts are willing to coordinate to provide technical support to Palestinian agro-industrialization, which opens the gate for Israeli political support for the project. So I believe the economic challenge will open political doors. This is what Japan tried to challenge. Next example is Japan's peace-building support in Afghanistan. NATO dispatched International Security Assistance Force ISAF to Afghanistan after 2001, and Turkey, of course, took part in it. Regarding the security sector building, 5 countries allotted the tasks, and Japan was assigned the hardest one, DDR in Afghanistan. No other country, US, UK, Germany, or others, didn't want to assume it because disarming and demobilizing Afghanistan military factions and soldiers seemed a very dangerous task. Japan had experience in disarming Japanese soldiers after the Second World War and assumed it in 2002. In consequence, Japanese staffs in Afghanistan exhibited their skill. Ambassador Kinichi Komano is a Persian language speaker and demonstrated high skill to command the DDR process. Kenji Isezaki, Mr. Disarmer, had experience in DDR in Sierra Leone and East Timor and set up DDR administration in Afghanistan. Rumiko Seya, called Miss DDR by President Karzai, is another peace-building expert. Finally, they disarmed more than 20,000 soldiers and 2,500 tanks and artillery, which had impact to have led the first Afghanistan presidential election in 2005 in success. I estimate that this success in DDR process was equal to military achievement won by one division of military force, but with no military second casualties. Do you agree with this evaluation? Now my lecture is close to end. Let me read 2 evaluations. The first comment is this. Japan's breakaway, a sign of something much bigger in the world of foreign aid, the death of the DAC's traditional and narrow definition of ODA. Do you agree this or not? The second comment is this. Japan changed ODA to development cooperation out of respect for equal partnership with aid recipients distance itself from using conditionality. Japan shares more similarities with emerging donors, so recent change in global aid architecture offers opportunities for Japan to play a proactive global role. I'm very happy to listen to you if you agree with this view and your reasons. My evaluation to Japan's international cooperation is Japan as promoter of multilateralism through international cooperation. Japan has stayed in OECD and has challenged to maintain economic growth approach and refresh ODA policy. Japan cooperated Afghanistan reconstruction with UN, ISAF, and other donors and demonstrated its skill in DDR through non-military measures. Japan also manipulates multilateral cooperation through triangle cooperation to promote South-South ODA cooperation. Turkey is a very good partner for Japan. I demonstrated example of Palestinian Anglo-Industrialization Park too. So now, do you have answers to hypothesis or quiz today through my lecture? Blue lines are what I added to the original one. I'm sure that I could not give details and I could not explain many points related to my topic today yet. Thus, I am very happy with your questions and comments and talk with you. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Sensei. Thank you very much for this illuminating presentation. I have to admit that our students in our department, we don't really have any class on international cooperation on foreign aid, which is a real weakness, I think, because in the last few years, Turkey has emerged as one of the, or let me put it differently, foreign aid emerged as an important issue in Turkish foreign policy and its international relations in the last 1 decade, actually. Even though, well, there's also this statistic that Turkey has become the #1 aid provider in the world. But the truth is, Turkey calculates the money it spends for the Syrian refugees in Turkey, which are almost about their numbers approach to 4 million. And all the budget for that is also included in this aid, foreign aid. So if you exclude this, Turkey is not a major player in the international aid. Nevertheless, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, if you look at the news, Anadolu Agency, I checked, I made a survey of that. We see that foreign aid has actually become an important topic. It raised in the agenda. It became one of the major tools of Turkish foreign policy. I'm not only talking about Syrian refugees, but to the rest of the world. And a huge number of government institutions are involved in it, which actually means employment opportunities for our students. So I would strongly urge our students to get into this.
I could not figure out the background of your student exactly, and I hope I could at least provide some topic for students.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Actually, many of the terminology here they might have heard for the first time. So I'm grateful
really.
presentation.
I'm sorry. I should have added more background.
No, this is very good. This is very good.
Maybe.
And I hope that it will encourage our students to move on to work in PICA maybe, or in the Red Crescent, okay, the Directory of Turks Abroad. You know, there are lots of different institutions in Turkey. And Japan is an experienced country. Since 1954, the Colombo Plan, Japan has been very active in giving foreign aid, development aid. And it has been the major foreign policy tool of Japan for the post-war period, for the last half century. So there is a huge amount of experience there. And actually, TIKA, the Turkish aid agency TIKA, has been modeled after JICA. This has been told by the TIKA official.
Yes. They are very good partners. Yes.
I do have a few questions, and
Yes.
first of all, I kind of missed this Söderberg's argument that Japan's break away from the DAC or the aid structure. Can you explain it again? Japan has been an old DAC country, as far as I know. In what way Japan is breaking away?
Yes. Yes. DAC, in the history of foreign aid, DACs, World Bank, and many donors, they have sways. At early, I think in 1950s, many of them believed in economic growth approach, but it's depended on classical growth theory, economic growth theory, and they regarded it won't working. They switched ODA policy to poverty reduction approach. In contrast, Japan joined in OECD, and from the beginning, Japan relied on economic growth approach, and up to today, Japan's ODA budget share allotment is like this. ODA economic growth approach shares largest amount, and second, poverty reduction approach is still second largest amount. If you will have different classifications in different type of calculation. For example, in year 2000, I can say around in recent ODA budget, like economic infrastructure and service sector shares around 40% of Japan's ODA, and poverty reduction sector shares around 15 to 20% in Japanese ODA, which means economic growth approach is about infrastructure building, technical cooperation, energy supply, transportation building, industrial park building, etc. That's about economic growth approach. And poverty reduction approach is ODA over basic food supply, primary elementary education supply offering, and water supply building, for example. They focus only for basic human needs. These are differences. And this debate has been kept up to very recent years. Like, as I understand, up to around 2010, ODA, the DAC countries opposed to Japan's approach, as I understand. Did you get the point, or?
Yes, thank you, Sensei. So it looks like the Japanese approach seems to be more useful for middle-income countries rather than less developed countries. Am I wrong?
Japan's approach, let me see. It's very hard to calculate ODA statistics. Statistics governments and OECD provides. But I figure out Japan provides poverty reduction. Japan takes poverty reduction approach to LDCs, or the countries which still has no capability for economic growth. Japan provides basic infrastructures for social sectors or like this. So Japan is not doing anything too hard for LDCs, but rather Japan focus economic growth approach to UMICs because they are ready for economic growth. This is what Japan is doing. Because the amount of ODA seems larger for distributed to larger to UMIC because I believe low developing countries they cannot absorb foreign aid in with larger amount of budget. They have limit in aid absorption capacity. So I believe Japan's choice of ODA distribution is sound. This is this is my view, but this is what I try to explain today. Yes.
I understand. Thank you. Thank you.
And Japan provides loans, economic loans to LMICs, which naturally give the amount of ODA naturally becomes much bigger than granting aid because the loans will be spent for infrastructure building of bridge, road, industrial park, etc.
Yes, Sensei, I see. It's about the absorption capacity in the end, I suppose. There is a question Professor Punaripek asked, and I would like to add on that as well. What does Professor Nakamura think about new development institutions led by China? I would like to extend on that question as well. How do you think these new donors, the non-DAC donors, are they having any impact on Japan's ODA?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes, China as a donor, it has huge impact to the world. Yes, but first I would point out that China still didn't. They refused to be a member to OECD, and China still doesn't disclose the true data over their foreign aid. So it's some of we have we can understand the truth and still they don't understand that some aspects of Chinese foreign aid. But however, last year in July, World Bank reported debt trap situation in low developing countries in the world. The World Bank reported more than half of low-income countries in the world fell in debt crisis last year. And 63% of the bilateral debt is owned by China last year. Japan shares 15%. So China's approach, China's ODA, I don't know if we can call it ODA or at least foreign aid approach, is very similar to Japan's. In general, it looks the same because China learned Japanese ODA approach in 1990s. They learned a lot. They made a lot of studies over Japanese approach. And thus, China takes economic growth approach to to other developing countries. They provide infrastructure. They do not set conditionality, political conditionalities, and low developed countries prefer Chinese foreign aid. However, as well known, Chinese foreign aid is really tight to their Chinese companies and Chinese laborers. So that means OECD donors have set guidelines to restrict their ODA. The ODA should not be the source of national interest of donors. But China clearly they don't set up such guidelines. This is a problem. We don't have exact figures over Chinese foreign aid, but the debate is going on, as I understand. This is first answer.
I see. I see. Well, maybe connected with this, Professor Pınaripek has another question. ODA is part of bilateral relations between donor and recipient countries.
Yes.
ODA has increased after the Cold War, while official development assistance by the World Bank has declined. So in context, can we consider this as a shift from Bretton Woods institutions based on multilateralism to bilateral relations? Let me add on to, I keep on adding on to Professor Pek's Pınar's questions, but this rise of new donors like China, is it maybe making ODA as a bilateral relation more important than the multilateralism, like the aid provided by World Bank or other multilateral institutions?
China's impact is huge. Yeah, certainly.
The Japanese ODA I forgot actually, the bilateral part or the multilateral part. Which one is stronger in Japanese aid?
Japanese aid is distributed. 20% of Japanese ODA is allotted to multilateral organizations.
I see.
Constantly around 20%. And 80% disbursed through bilateral relations. 20% of ODA distribution to multilateral organization is fairly higher than average among donors, as I understand. So the ODA's world is based on bilateral disbursement, basically, as I understand. I'm not an expert. I'm beginner over this field of study. I mean, aid studies, but this is my basic understanding.
Thank you. I also do not know how much Turkey's foreign assistance is multilateral, but I suspect most of the emerging donors prefer bilateral means rather than the multilateral. But yes,
at least China is not joining to multilateral organizations. So yes, I don't know, Shanghai Corporation does aid works, but basically China distributes ODA to bilateral channels, as I understand. But yes, that's why I believe, yes, many low developing countries are expecting China, because China doesn't set up conditionalities. That's first reason, I believe. But it's good impact. It has good impact. China has good impact too. Because of China's impact, other donors understand economic growth approach is exactly what developed countries had expected. Japan was the only donor which resisted to other DAC donors, OECD donors, but China had a same direction, same approach, economic growth approach. Thus, it has good impact too. Yes, this is my point. Another point.
I understand. Economic development is more in the focus for Japan, emerging donors.
What do you think? What do you think? Developing countries expect?
It does make sense to me. It does make sense to me. I mean, anyway, there are lots of anecdotes about this, but I don't want to get into detail about that's why there's a Paris Accord, right? Because of the ineffectiveness of the most of the poverty reduction aid given to countries have forced at least the DAC countries to bring some standards. But anyway, there's another question, Professor, I would like to ask. Karahan Kutlu Keskin is asking, do you think Japan gains anything geopolitically from the foreign aid it gives out? We can think of France's aid to friendly regimes in West Africa to maintain their stability and ensure French geopolitical influence. Do you think something similar can be said for Japan? Or is it strictly humanitarian in nature? Thanks for the presentation.
Yes, yes. Sure, Japan has strategic thinking, though it's Japan's realism in international relations is based on neoclassical realism or defensive realism, as I understand. Japan distributes, for example, channels ODA for refugee aid in Pakistan. After the USSR invaded Afghanistan, Japan started to provide refugee aid to Pakistan. And also, Japan support Turkish support to Syrian refugees, and Japan support Jordan also to their work in supporting refugees, various refugees, Palestinian, Iraq, Syria, etc. So it's Japanese way of strategic thinking, I believe. Also, like as I mentioned, Japan began to engage in peace building in post-conflict countries. I mentioned Cambodia, East Timor, Philippines, Afghanistan, Iraq, which means Japan is aiming for the security and peace in global areas. Not only basically, yes, it's basically around Japan's supply zones. That's true. That's true. From the Middle East, Africa to the Japan sea lane. It's true. It's true. Basically, it's true. Yes, yes. So it's part of Japan's national security. Yes, it's true. It's true. Yes, yes.
It's maybe a wider. It's a strategic thinking, if not necessarily geopolitical from a narrow point of view, but a strategic thinking.
Yes.
Geopolitical. It's about security, about the world. Sometimes about the relations with United States. Sometimes it's that's specific country. Maybe this interests are there.
Yes. U.S. and Japan. U.S.-Japan relations. The relations over ODA disbursement is a hot topic. Yes, it's hot topic too. Many scholars like OA, US scholar OA, insists that US pressures Japan to distribute this country, not this country, like this. OA insists US pressures Japan to decide Japan's ODA policy. But my observation is that Japan talk with the U.S. government officials over the global situation, global strategic positions. However, Japan refused U.S. requests in many ways. First, Japan doesn't dispatch military forces to Iraq or Afghanistan. We don't. And second, I observed that Japan's ODA choice is different from the US. Like the United States intentionally distribute to Palestine and Israel, but Japan didn't distribute to ODA to Israel, not at all, not almost none. This is first difference. And second, Japan's approach to ODA is economic growth approach. We don't have military aid. The U.S. Choice in ODA is, first of all, it's military aid, and second, they prefer poverty reduction approach. So I believe the basic choice is different. ODA structure is different.
Yes, just to add it, United States wants Japan to be more cooperative and be in more in closer partnership with United States in its various strategic policies around the world. But Japan, instead of sending soldiers to American wars, just sends aid to countries and places where Americans ask them to do. As a matter of fact, the big amounts of Japanese aid that come to Turkey was because United States wanted Japan to give aid to Turkey because Turkey was a frontline state during the Cold War. So this is in a way Japan avoiding being engulfed in American wars or instead of following aid diplomacy. I want to add one thing more. I talk with, I mean, this is a very new research for me too, the foreign aid. But I've been meeting and talking in different occasions by the people who are involved in foreign aid or development aid, ODA, etc., in Japan and in Turkey. As you go up in the hierarchy, like you will talk with the politicians or advisors to politicians, the thinking is very strategic. I mean, not necessarily geopolitical, but very strategic, okay? Sometimes security is in it or some other policies in it. But as you go down to people who later on decide on the details on how to formulate the foreign policy, and to institutions like JICA, TICA, who actually carry out that policy, people working there, and to NGOs, we don't talk about it very much, but all the civilian organizations, altruism, that is to say, the humanitarian idea, becomes more prevalent. Instead of strategic thinking, people who are involved in the aid actually want to do involved in it because they like to help other people, okay? In Turkey's case, religion is given as a reason quite frequently, or some kind of internationalization thinking in the case of Japan. So I would like to answer again to Karahanku's question as well, as that both is there, both strategic thinking and humanitarian concerns are there. But the big guys on the top are formulating or deciding on the budget of this thing, think more strategically. The people who are in the application and the field study of it is more into the humanitarian mindset. This is how I saw actually. This is not a very methodological research. Yes. My interviews during the time with Turkish and Japanese people are involved in aid shows that kind of division to me.
Yes. I can add that Japan's aid to Turkey is the case that yes, it's true that U.S. request and Japan's preference met together. Yes, it's true. But in case of Israel, it didn't, unfortunately. And sometimes Japan has initiative to provide ODA initially, like Vietnam. Japan wanted to start ODA to Vietnam, which US didn't want. Then Japan began political process with Vietnam, and finally US agreed. Yes, there are some different cases.
Thank you
And
for
yes, I
clarifying it.
agree totally with you that
Yes.
anyway, besides strategic calculation, yes, aid workers in JICA, TICA, NGOs, yes, they have different thinking, different mind. I don't know exactly the other countries' aid workers, but I listen to some views that Japanese aid workers are really sympathetic. They can share feeling with Muslim people or developing countries. Uh, they listen to what people in the field of aid work. Yes, this is what I observe. Mm,
Yes.
Many say that at every interview to any aid workers, they say we learn from aid recipient. We are giving for foreign aid, but it's not really aid, but rather we are learning. They say this is the attitude what I wanted to repeat. Yes, yes.
Thank you for clarifying, Sensei. I would also like to add that the aid policy for Japan is one of the major foreign policy tools. So there might be some US pressure, but it would be wrong to define Japanese aid development aid policy as an extension of US policy. Japan also, especially in the last 1 or 2 decades, have came up with its own concepts, ideas, terminology about to aid, how it should happen. And as a matter of fact, in the last, I think, 1 decade, it has started to become a rule maker or a kind of a shaper of how the aid regime in the world has to be going. Its contributions to the concept of human security that you have mentioned, and it's also the way that it puts its influence on developing what the global health aid should be, and etc. So it is now an autonomous part of Japanese foreign policy. I should add that.
Mm,
Uh,
mm,
yes. So
mm, mm.
uh,
Yes, human security is Japanese government is advocating human security. Yes, in the world of yes ODA. Yes.
yes,
Mm,
Sensei. Thank you very much. It's about time. It was a very informative talk, and I'm more than convinced that we should at least offer an elective course about international
yeah.
cooperation, foreign aid, and something like that in top. And I would like to promote job seeking in these fields in the future, which I believe in Turkish foreign policy and all around the world. Foreign aid is going to gain more and more importance, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, which showed that international cooperation is necessary, unavoidable in a sense, in this anarchical world of vaccine nationalism and everything, right? So thank you very much for your informative talk, Professor. And
Thank you very much, Sensei Hoja, and yes, all listeners. uh, yes, I believe yes, foreign aid is a channel to open communication among nations and citizens, and I'm sorry that I could not add more details or information, but hope we can start exchanging our views. Hopefully, our students, our graduate students, and your side in future, and of course with you, Dr. Bahadur Sensei. And thank you very much again for this beautiful opportunity.
thank you very much for participating. Thank you very much. It has been very
Thank you
valuable.
very
Thank
much.
you. I hope to see you again. And
Teşekkür